What's up guys, welcome back to the channel. Today I want to respond to a comment I got on my long cycle longevity video the other day. So I made a video where I explained my position that I think the kettlebell sport long cycle is a fantastic exercise for longevity, and I gave 4 reasons for that. Number 1, it trains your fast twitch motor units. Number 2, it maintains your hypertrophy and muscle mass. Number 3, it trains your VO2 max. And number 4, it trains your flexibility. So the comment I got was, lifting weights in itself does not provide any longevity. Gymnastics, racket sports and sprints give you 5 to 8 years of life above average. So I'm aware of the papers the person is likely referring to, but before I get into it, I want to tell a little anecdote. So years ago I was interested in the history of the Soviet Union, and I read that Joseph Stalin was very fond of a certain researcher and scientist who studied longevity. And that scientist thought that with certain interventions we could live to 100 to 150 years, and he got a lot of funding from Stalin and a lot of awards, etc. And then one day he died at the ripe old age of 65. And Stalin, when he was informed of his death, said, "That crook, he fooled us all." And that's just to make the point that I believe to be an expert in something you have to walk the walk, and that's why I don't consider myself and can't be a longevity expert, because I'm simply too young. So first and foremost, I look at what people who are 50 to 60 plus, who are in fantastic shape, have to say. And another point that I want to make is, when I talk about longevity, I don't mean longevity as in years of living so much. I'm talking more about athletic longevity, so maintaining your capacity as you get older. So some people differentiate between lifespan, how many years you live, and health span, how functional you actually are. Of course, they are going to correlate, and in general, healthier people are going to live longer. Now, when we get to the comment, the thing is, we have to be really smart and use our brains when we look at some of the scientific data, because, like I said, the number one thing I tend to look at is people who actually are in shape and who are old. So when we look at the research, we always have to take it with a grain of salt, because there's just a lot of noise in there. And one study I found here is the Copenhagen City Heart Study, Schnoor et al. 2018. I think this is one of the studies the person was referring to, where they followed 8,500 adults for up to 25 years and estimated life expectancy gains compared to sedentary people. And they got tennis plus 9.7 years, badminton plus 6.2 years, soccer plus 4.7 years, cycling plus 3.7 years, and it goes on like that. And the authors themselves said, because this is an observational study, it remains uncertain whether this relationship was causal. So they say themselves they are not sure about the causality, because just to give you some examples of how this may not be causal. So people who play tennis in general are wealthier, right? So wealthier people also have better access to healthcare. So wealth in general, or socioeconomic status, correlates very well with life expectancy. And I think in this study they accounted for some of those factors, but that's just to kind of make the point. And there's another 2 studies actually who looked at elite athletes. In 2021, they looked at 165,000 former elites, and athletes in general lived longer than the general population, but power athletes, including weightlifters, boxers and wrestlers, showed no significant extra longevity benefit. Now, does it mean that weightlifting is useless for health and longevity? No, because we can't look at professional Olympic level weightlifters. Those athletes, first off, they are going to have what? They are going to have a high BMI. And that means they're going to carry a lot of extra muscle mass for their frame, and that's not very conducive to longevity. If you carry a lot of weight for your frame, that's not good, because that's more work for all of your organ systems. It doesn't matter if it's muscle or fat. Then those people, probably a lot of them, have abused steroids over their athletic career. So we can't just look at weightlifters and say, oh, those people didn't lift any longer, so their weightlifting is useless. Boxers and wrestlers. Boxing and wrestling training is extremely strenuous, and you're at a very, very high risk of concussions, especially in boxing. So that alone could negate a lot of the benefits you would get otherwise. Then we have a 2025 study on 95,000 international elite athletes, and they found gymnastics and pole vaulting at the top for males, with racket sports also strong. And here again we have to think. So one hypothesis the researchers are making is that social interactions, so sports that have a social component, actually are more beneficial to longevity, because isolation in general is inversely correlated with longevity. So it's bad for you to be lonely, basically. And so if you go to a team sport where you're going to banter with your friends and you just have an active social life, that alone may be good for you irrespective of the sport. And gymnastics, again, why could a gymnast possibly live longer? So if we thought about the weightlifters, who are usually very big for their frame, gymnasts in general, especially elite gymnasts, are not only short, but they are also very light for their frame. So who doesn't live very long? Tall and big people. And who lives very long? Short and light people. Have you ever seen a 100-year-old person who's 6'5" and 300 pounds? No, they don't exist. They all die much earlier. So is it the gymnastics that made them live longer, or did they just have the ideal body type for gymnastics that just so happens to be the body type that tends to live longer? Correlation and causation, right? So that doesn't mean that gymnastics and tennis aren't fantastic sports, because they do a lot of great things for you. They address a lot of the things I talked about in my video. And something researchers also speculate that sports that address your aerobic and anaerobic energy systems are better for longevity, because you have the VO2 max, and you have the strength, and you have the flexibility, and in the case of tennis you also have like the coordination and gymnastics as well, of course. So those sports are doing fantastic things for you. But when we look at other research, we see that just lifting weights, quote unquote, is very well associated with more robust health, at the very least less frailty, and probably also with an increase in actual lifespan. But kettlebell sport isn't just lifting weights, okay? Kettlebell sport is not just lifting weights. That's what I said in my video, because the most robust indicator we have for predicting longevity is VO2 max. And kettlebell sport long cycle is not just lifting weights, it's a VO2 max dependent activity. Go take two just 16 kilo kettlebells and do as many reps of long cycle as you can in 10 minutes and get back to me. And I think things will become very clear very quickly, okay? This does train your heart. And that's kind of one point I was also making in my long cycle video is like, I don't recommend only doing kettlebell sport long cycle, because you need to train some other things. You need to train your speed, you need to train your coordination, you need to train other movement patterns. Like you shouldn't just move in the sagittal plane, just backwards, forwards, okay? But it's just a great base movement to use in your training. And like I said, I look at people who actually are walking the walk, and when I look at kettlebell sport athletes, a lot of them are 40, 50, 60 plus, and those who keep training, they are in fantastic shape. So that's the main thing I draw my conclusions from. And of course there are other sports and other athletes who are also aging very, very well, and draw inspiration from those as well. So I hope that makes sense. Just we have to like think a little bit more deeply about things and not just look at an AI infographic about some study and say, oh, we just need to play tennis and we're going to live 9 years longer, because things rarely are that simple. All right, guys, see you guys next time with more informational content.